There was a place in London where a man could be locked away for stealing something as small as a loaf of bread and be dead within days, not necessarily because a judge had ordered it, but because of what waited behind the walls. It was a place where freedom had a price, where suffering could be negotiated, and where even the final hours of a life could depend on what you could afford. For centuries, the mere mention of its name was enough to unsettle Londoners. Parents warned their children about it. Crowds gathered outside its gates. Writers described it in dark tones. The name itself carried weight. This was Newgate Prison, one of the most feared institutions in London. A place that shaped how the city understood justice, punishment, and survival for more than 700 years. Newgate's story began long before the 1600s. The prison was first established in 1188 during the reign of King Henry II. It stood near one of the gates in the old Roman wall of London. Its position made it both visible and symbolic. Those brought through its gates entered a different world. Over the centuries, Newgate was expanded, altered, and rebuilt several times. Each reconstruction added new layers to an already ancient prison. By the 17th century, Newgate was already centuries old. Its walls carried the marks of time. But what defined Newgate was not its age. It was what happened inside. Men, women, and children were all confined within its walls. Families sometimes lived together. Inside the prison, daily life continued in confinement. Animals even moved through the same spaces. Pigs were kept by prisoners as companions or as food. They wandered through corridors and sleeping areas. This continued for generations, until pigs were finally banned in 1714. Inside Newgate, inequality was everywhere. Those with money could improve their conditions. They could buy food, straw bedding, or even a private room. Those without resources crowded into shared wards. They slept on damp floors or dirty straw. Survival depended on what you could pay. Disease spread quickly. In such conditions, overcrowding and poor sanitation created constant danger. Jail fever moved through the prison. Some prisoners weakened before ever reaching trial. Newgate was not a place of long sentences. Most prisoners were waiting for trial, waiting for transfer, or waiting for execution. Time inside Newgate moved unpredictably. Days stretched into weeks, weeks into months. Some prisoners remained for years. The prison was also tied to public execution. The condemned spent their last night inside Newgate. Then they were taken through the streets of London. Crowds gathered to watch. Some jeered, some prayed. Many simply observed. The destination was Tyburn, a place of public execution. This ritual continued for centuries until 1783. Executions were moved to outside Newgate itself. The distance between prison and death disappeared. The condemned stepped out and faced execution immediately. William Cox was an 18th century English criminal who became well known after being imprisoned in Newgate Prison while awaiting execution. Convicted of violent robbery, his case attracted public attention, and pamphlets describing his life, crimes, and final days were sold to curious crowds. Like many celebrity criminals of the time, Cox was observed by visitors inside the prison, especially in the press yard. Had you ever heard these stories about Newgate Prison before? And if you've been to London, have you ever visited the Old Bailey, the very place where Newgate once stood? Let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Throughout its long history, Newgate endured dramatic events. When the Great Fire of London swept through the city in 1666, the prison was badly damaged. Flames consumed nearby buildings, parts of the structure collapsed. Newgate had to be rebuilt. Once again, more than a century later, the prison faced destruction again. In 1780, during the Gordon riots, crowds stormed Newgate. The prison was set on fire. Prisoners were released into the streets. The damage was severe. And once again, Newgate was rebuilt. In an ironic twist, Lord George Gordon himself, whose name the riots carried, was later imprisoned inside Newgate. Many notable prisoners passed through its gates. William Penn, later founder of Pennsylvania, was imprisoned there in 1670. John Bernardi spent decades confined without trial. During that time, he married and raised children inside the prison. Later, the thief Jack Sheppard became famous for escaping Newgate. His story spread across London. Writers later drew inspiration from Newgate. Charles Dickens was influenced by its atmosphere. Even Oscar Wilde would later be held there. Exercise in Newgate Prison was not meant for health. It was punishment disguised as movement. Prisoners were often forced into cramped yards where they walked in slow circles for hours, chained together or watched by guards. Others were made to turn heavy crank machines, carry stones, or perform exhausting repetitive labor. The goal was not fitness, but exhaustion. These routines drained strength, broke morale, and reminded inmates that even movement inside Newgate was controlled, enforced, and rarely voluntary. On visiting days, Newgate Prison became a strange and unsettling meeting place between the outside world and those locked within. Visitors lined up along iron grates, peering into the wards where prisoners lived in crowded and harsh conditions. Despite centuries of rebuilding, conditions remained harsh. Overcrowding persisted. Disease remained common. The system of payment continued. By the 19th century, Newgate seemed outdated. New prisons were built. Yet Newgate continued operating into the modern era. Eventually, after more than 7 centuries, Newgate Prison was demolished. The Central Criminal Court, known as the Old Bailey, rose in its place. Today, almost nothing remains, only fragments of wall near Amen Court. But for centuries, Newgate defined fear in London. And for many who entered its gates, it was the last place they ever saw